systems change in education. We're going to go off script a little bit here. We might have a few, very short PowerPoint presentations, but basically we're going to prototype, we're going to try and workshop together the future of technical education. And so it's an experiment for all of us, and I hope you'll participate. Just to set the tone a little bit, as you're all aware, educational systems are extremely slow to change, and they're resistant to change. And yet, we're living in a world that is in great flux. The ways that we educated in the 20th century are not needed in the 21st century, and yet we really haven't made systems change. We're still kind of working on very old models. And, we have enormous global challenges. We have climate change, poverty, inequality, and, all the things that the UN SDGs kind of, surface in in the SDGs. And we have a rapidly changing global economy that's driven in large part by technology and technology development. Technology that's developing at a very disruptive pace, generative AI being a perfect example. And in many places, our young people are learning all the skills that they need outside of school, which is kind of disturbing, right? You would hope that it would be otherwise. So what does it take to make systemic change in education, especially with regards to technical and digital literacies? Should we be working school by school, teacher by teacher, community by community, or should we, sort of a bottom-up grassroots way, which is a lot slower than maybe we'd like to see? Or is there a way to leapfrog and disrupt the current more sort of linear progress of change that's happening in education? So, you guys, we've got some hard questions to talk about. These are some of the questions that I think about when I think about education, and especially about the digital and technical literacies that are needed in the 21st century. So how do we educate the next generation to be agile enough to keep pace with rapid technology development? How do we ensure that the majority of the next generation can participate in this highly technical economy? And then, just understanding that it's important because we don't want to repeat the same mistakes we made in the first digital revolution, where, the majority of the benefits inured to a very few people, right? How do we guarantee that the majority of our youth today and in the future, can really participate in this highly technical economy? And so I personally think that we want the majority of our young minds in schools today and tomorrow to be able to create their own technological futures and to share in the wealth and in the positive impact that technology and technology development can have in our lives, and that technology development can offer. And so that's kind of where we're starting. And I have an amazing group of people here, panelists here today. I'm going to introduce you each individually and have you come up and just tell us about, giving me 5 minutes about who you are and what your relationship is to education. And then we'll start our workshop, so to speak. Okay, so I'd love to start with Sangay. If you could come up, Sangay. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for joining us today for this conversation. We're here today and we're talking about two of my favorite things to talk about: education and technology, and more specifically, how we can use technology to enhance education for all. So my name is Sangay Tinlay, and I work as an EdTech specialist with the EdTech Hub, and I also lead the help desk work in Southeast Asia. So to get started, I want to give you a little bit of context about the work that we do at my organization, which is the EdTech Hub. So the EdTech Hub is a global partnership, is a global research partnership, and we really focus on providing the evidence that's needed to allow people to make decisions around technology, make informed decisions around the use of technology. So like Sherry said, I think when we talk about digital education and technology, we really think about two different things, right? We talk about educating children for technology use, but then also we talk about using technology to enhance learning and to be able to use technology to improve learning outcomes for children. And that's really the lens that I'm coming in from and what I would like to speak about today at the panel. Why we're here, so why the Tech Hub exists and the work that we do is so important is because we feel that technology has the power and the ability to help solve the global learning crisis that we're facing currently. But that potential is not being realized. In most part, we think that it's because there isn't enough evidence about what works, what doesn't work, how what works should be used. So we really try to make sure that we act as a node where we can provide this information and allow stakeholders, policymakers, governments everywhere in the world to be able to make the accurate decisions around how to use technology in their education spaces. These are the 5 topic areas that I work really closely with and my organization works really closely with. So I just wanted to give you a snapshot. There's no quiz after, but I'm just putting this up here for your reference, just so you can take a look. But something that I would something that I would really like to focus on, or something that I would like to introduce to you today, is the questions that we ask about technology use when we talk about using technology for education. And I think the first thing that I want to highlight is the most important thing and what I would like to spend the most time talking about today during the panel. And I hope my fellow panelists can also look into as well and consider as we talk about specific technology use cases is, will the use of technology lead to sustained impact on learning outcomes? Because I think that what we've noticed is when we work on digital education or technology in education, it's often perceived as a goal in itself, a means to an end. And something that we really want to highlight is that it is a tool. It is a tool for education, much like a pencil is a tool, a textbook is a tool. We see the power of technology as being something that can enhance learning outcomes and can address existing educational challenges. I don't think that we want to focus on digital education for the sake of digital education. So that is one question that I would like to highlight for our audience, but also throw to my fellow panelists as when we iterate and ideate and brainstorm about what good education systems look like, are we putting learning at the center? And are we looking at technology as a tool, but not as a means to an end? Yeah, so I'm going to stop here and let Sherry introduce the next panelist.
Okay, Mr. Okezwe, I think you're next on the hot seat here. Is that you? Yeah. So this is Okezwe Bell. He's from the United States. He's just graduated from high school and he's about to enter college, and he's already an entrepreneur in his own right, and I'm going to let him tell you about what he does.
Oh, okay, perfect. Yeah, so my understanding and context with education comes from answering the question, what does building responsible technology actually look like? And so during my keynote on Thursday, I'll be delving into this more deeply, but I wanted to just take a overhead look at what some of the work I'm doing and how it ties back into this concept of integrating technology into education. So being the child of 2 electrical engineers, I've been able to have the fortune of being exposed to technology at a very early age, meaning that, I've been working in a lot of different fields over time and starting to get involved also in the humanitarian aspect of the technology, whether that be building neural interfaces at the MIT Media Lab's Fluid Interfaces group, or designing a prosthetic arm, or doing advocacy with the United Nations. I found that a core part of the technology is actually this very human aspect. And one problem that we're encountering right now is that as technology's pervasiveness increases and Gen Z is continually married to our phones and our social media, the issues that technology present also crescendo. We've had cases of Apple's facial identification software misidentifying someone and leading to their arrest, or cases in which ShotSpotter, which is an AI-based gunshot detection tool, has actually led to the death of a 13-year-old boy in Chicago. So while technology has so many amazing promises, it also has a significant amount of woes, and if we're not careful, can result in some catastrophic impacts. And so that's why I really use this responsibility framework to inform a lot of my innovation. It starts with communicating with and actively involving stakeholders in the design and development process, and then it targets assessing impact via intervention, reach, and shared positive outcomes. So say you're building a microfinancing platform, shameless plug, you will obviously need to assess what are the benefits looking like in terms of returns from these microfinances, how are they being supported through digital identification, things of that nature. And then finally, having an on-ground presence. Beyond just engaging communities, it's really vital that you have a presence on ground within that community so that you can work within it and ensure that your technology is responsive and able to interface properly with that solution. One of the worst can do is just dump technology onto an already vulnerable population and expect it works. And large companies have tried this, overhead organizations have tried this, even some research groups have tried this, and every single time it just doesn't work. And so one case that I want to show you of how to responsibly innovate is actually my own organization, which is Fidutam. It's a SIM card-based application that uses mobile network operators to provide an internet-free app to provide access to digital identification and microloans to unbanked populations. We're serving right now around 1,100 people, and we've also recently been established as the largest youth-led corporation globally with a team of over 1,000 student-led volunteers working towards this goal of providing digital identity as well as microloans to everyone. And given Bhutan's recent legislation, it actually ties very closely with this amazing place. And so hopefully excited to explore some integrations of Fidutam here as well. And so one really important thing I wanted to just show you is that we've been able to make a really significant amount of impact in a short period of time because we're able to properly assess how our solution fits within the context of unbanked communities. We've distributed around 150K in microloans with an 100% repayment rate, and over $400,000 in collective profits have been made by the unbanked communities. And now we're involving ourselves in policy, legislation, corporate stakeholdership to ensure that other companies and governments follow suit in this idea of creating socially responsive innovation. So I'll stop here for now, but this is the overarching idea, and I believe that the heart of this social responsiveness starts with educating students on innovation and how to do it in a way that is meaningful, technical, but also impactful and correct.
Thank you very much. There we go. So Arun, I don't envy you. You're next. I'm so delighted to introduce Arun Kapoor, who is the director of the Royal Academy here. Yes, right. And the Bhutan Institute.
Well, as you can see, it's a really hard act to follow. So I'm not even going to try to say anything. I mean, those two, I think their combined ages are less than mine. So thank you. I mean, the whole idea of what we're going to be trying to do today is just taking those two conversations to the pitch. I'm a school teacher, have been for a long time. I started teaching when most people in this room were not born. I have an aspect of learning, and I was very happy in the conversations that Sherry had and most people had that did not use the word schooling for too many times, because that's the problem actually, that schooling has become an end in itself, right? Learning should be in there, and education needs to be the heart that runs, if you want to still call it schooling, because all over the world, we have become an over-schooled and under-educated society. So if you're going to be looking at something to talk about, is to how to bring education back into the learning spaces that we talk about. And if we can just include in that learning how to learn, I think everything else will fall into place. The what to learn keeps changing constantly. And the other thing I just want to talk a little bit about is evolution. Everything is about evolution. The whole universe that we're talking about from billions of years ago, from the Big Bang, there was chemical interactions that led to creating life part carries on, and the chemical, that's the world and the universe part, carries on. And now we're coming to the part on evolution where physics is coming in with the machines, and it's just part of the evolution process. That's just what I want to say, that evolution constantly going past things which were read okay for the 18th century, 19th century, 20th century will get left behind. Some things will stay with us, and the evolutionary process will carry the best forward. The other last thing that I want to just kind of leave here is this word artificial intelligence. Just want to say that for me, the AI is not artificial intelligence, but it is the aspect of augmenting intelligence. If you look at this whole system of artificial intelligence as something out there that is artificial, nothing to do with our lives, then it'll always be a problem that we have to deal with. But if we look at it as a system, a process that is going to help us augment our intelligence, then it becomes an internal part and becomes part of the evolution that I was talking about. So just, how am I connected with education? No idea. I work with the Royal Academy here in Paro. My colleagues are here, students are here. They've been part of this whole situation. And we are following what His Majesty's vision is basically, which is in the effort of education to create constructive, contributory citizens of a just and harmonious society. With a sentence like that, it applies anywhere in the world. And no matter how much we do, it won't be enough. A just and harmonious society sounds vague, but very difficult to bring about. So that's who I am. And to my two young colleagues who just set a hard task for us to follow, as I told you, I'm here to listen.
Thank you, Arun.
Next, we have Leah Haynes, Dr. Leah Haynes from 2-Bit Circus, who has a very different perspective on life and on education.
Thank you. And Arun set me up perfectly for one of my favorite Mark Twain quotes. And I don't think there's a meeting that doesn't benefit from a Mark Twain quote. Don't let school interfere with your education. So am I on here? I am, yeah. I just don't know how to find it.
Hold on a second.
Okay, but I can start by just saying 2-Bit Circus Foundation is actually a collection of 4 nonprofits that came together, all with very similar missions and very little conflict. Oh, okay. I can just talk about it. It's no problem. So as you heard earlier, we do global competitions around education. We do something called a STEAM Carnival as well. And the STEAM Carnival, think of it as a replacement for the science fair. The science fair gets all the kids who are already interested in science, and a STEAM Carnival gets everybody because it's a carnival. And then we get them interested in science. So we take playful learning very seriously. Any of you have seen my business card know that we take it very seriously. I'm the CEO and chief juggler at 2-Bit Circus. And what else can I tell you? I think I really do rely on my slides to prompt me, but it's okay. We do a lot of professional development for educators, trying to get them to move from lecture style to learning by doing. And in part, the goal is to get kids excited about what they're doing. Most kids show up at school every morning because they're expected to, not because they're excited to get back to what they were working on the day before. When you add project-based learning and kids are engaged, and especially if you give them agency over choosing some of the projects that they can do, there's an opportunity for them to really dive into what they're excited about and build from there. The professional development we do, it has always been sort of school by school. And this year, so we were talking about how long it takes to make change. We started building our maker spaces 7 years ago, and we built a few a year every year. And this, like in the 7th year, finally the district came, visited a STEAM lab and visited the professional development we did, and they ordered the equivalent of 4 years worth of work for us in that had to be delivered by the end of June. So it was an exciting time for our warehouse team and for the staff. But then we did the professional development with all 220 teachers. And what we didn't tell them is that we made the experience, they were the students and we were the teachers, and we modeled for them what we'd like them to do in their classrooms with their makerspace. And at the end of it, on the second day, we explained to them that that's what they had just experienced. So they'd gone through 8 different workshops with us, and they were, we didn't give any instruction. We gave challenges and prompts. And I do think that that is a more engaging way for students to be brought to the table. I mean, we can buy them expensive robotics kits, but they have all of the instructions already there. And the learning process for that design has been taken on by somebody who's an expert at it. We bring them random materials and something we call a Circustuino that you can probably figure out what the base of it is. It has a few extra things for younger children to be able to use, on-off switches and that kind of thing. And we ask them to make a robot, so they become collaborators and critical thinkers and problem solvers. And I'll talk more about it on Thursday, but I'm happy to be part of the panel.
And Suchit, do you want to get up and reintroduce yourself?
So I already talked earlier. My name is Suchit Jain. I'm part of SolidWorks Dassault Systems. And I, among other things, I do manage our education programs, which basically means we provide software for all the way from 4-year kids to, as I said earlier, 65, 70, whatever, everybody is a kid. But so we have a lot of education programs, and we have the software during this. So we have close to 5 million students using SolidWorks software in their classroom. And one thing I always talk about is inside the classroom, which is the curriculum, but also outside the classroom, which is all the student competitions. So whether it's the FIRST Robotics or the AUVSI, which is underwater vehicle competition, or solar car competition. And I think you talked about project-based learning. What at least I've seen over the last 20 years in supporting these kids with the software and so on, is that they learn quite a lot when they are outside the classroom. I have 3 kids myself, and all 3 of them went through FIRST Robotics. So I'm a mentor for FIRST Robotics, and I've seen the growth the kids have had through the project-based learning as well. So hopefully I'll be able to contribute to this panel as well with my personal learning as well.
And you're doing the Fab in a Box, so a Fab in a Box as well, right? So we're going to just take one moment here to reset the stage so that we're all in the middle instead of sitting way over there. If someone could come up and help us move chairs. Everybody can move. We can all help. So this is going to be kind of fun. Actually, why don't you, okay, Zoe, will you take a microphone, and then randomly one of you guys take a microphone, if you would. I think you have to turn them on, though. So this is going to be fun. The first thing I wanted to do is to put you on the hot seat, okay, Zoe. So you are at the point that you've just gotten through the K through 12 education system, and you've been very successful, and I think I want you to grill us, or at least reflect on what worked in the system for you, what didn't work? What do you think are the things that we need to change, and or to look at and to, develop differently? Go. And yeah, and be brutal, please.
Hello. This one's on. On. Why is it? Is this loud? Yeah. Oh, is it working? Okay, cool. Okay, so I think to start, one of the things that worked for me is also one of the things that doesn't work for a lot of people, which is the sort of core curriculum organization of how we classically teach. You have your global language, your math, your science, et cetera, et cetera. And for me, having that holistic education was definitely beneficial. But I also think that the way I learn is well suited for a typical assessment-based environment. However, I also think that if we are to start future-proofing our youth, we're going to need to integrate some deeper ideas and topics that are layered on top of these 5 sort of core subjects. And at the same time, we also have to provide the flexibility for students to be able to branch out and explore fields that they're interested in. So I guess one question that I pose, and you can answer this after, I guess I could go down all the areas rattled through the education system. But one question I pose is, how do you reconcile having a somewhat of a standardized education, but then also presenting this aspect of personalization that allows students to delve into topics that are more nuanced or interesting to them? Because I think one important thing is that in order for you to study AI or climate change or anything meaningfully, you do need that solid foundation in some of the most basic topics like math and physics and chemistry. So how do you allow for that level of learning at the base level while also accommodating for those who want to take that a step further?
Wow. Okay. That's pretty good. That's a pretty good question. Who would like to take a shot? A first shot.
Is this work? Yeah. So I think what he's talking about is absolutely the point, that we need to move into a more individualized learning system. And certainly the technology exists now for us to be able to do that. And also I think the technology exists so that it's easier on the teachers. If you have students working on their own, in their own interest level and at their own pace, you have a lot less frustration in the classroom. So there's a lot less discipline issues to deal with. And, right now in a class of 30 kids, you probably have a handful who are working at the level that the teacher is teaching. And then you have a significant group that are bored because they're ahead of things. They'd like to keep moving. And you have a group that are way behind who are embarrassed by it. So I think that individualized learning is the future of education.
One thing I've noticed is if you look at a lot of the online platforms today, they do provide a lot of learning, which, when somebody's motivated, they can go do it. So the technology is there and the learning paths are there. The problem, at least I think, is that in the schools are not adopting it because of various reasons. And part of it also is the private sector, where you go into jobs. Well, job needs you to have a degree, have some branding. If you're from Harvard or MIT, then probably easier to get job versus if you didn't have a school degree or college. So even though you may know everything, it's not. So I think the private sector is recognizing that, and we are seeing some companies who are, giving jobs and entertaining jobs and not necessarily requiring degrees. But in my mind, this branding and degrees is a big issue. So the learning is there, but how do you, I don't know what you think, but have you, on that?
Yeah, no, I agree that sort of the mecca of education, if you will, is to go into the corporate sector and make a lot of money. And oftentimes that does require you to navigate a level of educational bureaucracy. But I also think that on this point of a lot of schools aren't adopting it, I think there's a very big accessibility issue, not only because of cost, but also because there are technical literacy barriers that teachers also may encounter. So for example, with SolidWorks, I use SolidWorks for Fidutam. I used it for almost all of my projects actually. And I think one thing that's interesting is that, it was intuitive for me to be able to learn sort of CAD modeling systems, geometric shapes, and how to project them on a computer and design them. But for a lot of teachers who have not grown up in this age of information and technology, it's going to be very difficult for them to navigate the landscape of first learning this technology and then learning how to teach it. So how do we integrate that level of education not only on the side of the students, but also on the side of the teachers who need to learn how to teach this technology as well?
Yeah, this is fascinating conversation here, because here what we're trying to look at, what we have come up with, something called the Bhutan Baccalaureate, where we look at learning at the center of it all and using accessible technology at the base. So one of the couple of things, like when you look at subjects, like you talked about the maths and the language and the science, we have 3 languages, or sometimes 4 languages, according to the Bhutan Baccalaureate. There's Dzongkha, there's English, and there's maths. We teach maths as a language. It changes the whole attitude towards learning of mathematics. It actually has its own grammar, it has its poetry, and it has its literature. It just changes the way it kind of gets into your system. You learn to love it like you love poetry, right? So that's one aspect. You're using the what you talked about, the coexistence of a structured curriculum and a individual method of traversing that standardized or well-defined curriculum is now very, very important and needs to be done. I mean, we don't have a choice, right? And therefore, use of technology and use of AI in making, so we have created something what we call the motherboard, where every child makes, and each teacher and each domain and each area of learning makes their own roadmap. Where do you want to go? So you have a sense of ownership of where do you want to go. You put into place your indicators of success, that if I did this, and a child has a mentor who looks at it. So there is the individual growth path, but there is also a kind of a scaffolding provided that you can climb up. So this aspect of intermingling the individual with the structured path and using ways of taking ownership of your learning, and the part that you talked about, teachers, they have their roadmap too. They have the indicators of success too. They have to go up constantly on the learning ladder, right? And more often than not, it's the students who take them on this learning journey. So this other aspect of an adult coming into a room and being the sage on the stage, knowing all the answers, that has to go out of the window. We have to be learners together. And there are so many things that if the adults understand that I don't know this, and the people sitting in front of me know this much better than I will ever know, and just switch places, it does 2 things immediately. One, it teaches the students how hard it is to teach. When you got people who are not so easy to learn, and it makes teachers also understand how difficult it is to learn. And this joint journey is, I think, what you're talking about, that we need to be able to going on and then keeping track using technology. And that's just a solution that we're looking at over here.
So so I think everyone's brought up some really interesting points. Because I love your question. I love the direction that you're taking this conversation. And I think everyone on the stage has such interesting use cases for technology and education, and is also providing a lot of interesting facts. But I think that one of the things that I would like to highlight when we talk about individualized learning and we talk about education for all is we need to think about the players that are responsible for providing education, or the players that we deem as being responsible or have the authority for providing education. Suchit mentioned the role of private industry and private sector players in the education space. I would say that more and more, as learning and learning content becomes more openly accessible and more decentralized, all organizations around the world are playing a greater role in providing education, right? And I think that's so important, because when we talk about accessible learning and the use of technology for accessible learning, we need to remember that we have learners who are not in schools. We have out-of-school youth. We have people who've had to drop out for school, want to re-enter the education space. How can we use technology to help them? How can they have an individualized path that is specific to them and can cater to their specific learning needs? So I think that there is a lot of power in thinking about the role that greater society plays in provision of adequate, high quality, meaningful education. And I think also, Mr. Cooper, you touched on this, and Suchit, I think you mentioned this as well, but the idea of using more accessible technologies. So using technologies that youth are familiar with, using technologies that parents and caregivers trust. Because if we're going to be launching educational content on WeChat, do parents trust it as an educational source? I think that is something we need to think about, because you need the entire environment to be supportive of using technology in learning. And I think that for digital personalized learning, or being able to support personalized learning for each child, you need buy-in from all the stakeholders involved. And it's something that I think everyone in the community can work towards quite collaboratively.
Okay, so just one more question. So I believe you said that your parents were engineers and technical. Can you just sort of tell us why do you believe that you've been able to take this very successful technology path? What brought you there?
Yeah, so I definitely attribute it to a lot of privilege. Obviously, being in the United States comes with unique perks in terms of accessibility to technology, online resources, informal and formal education. And I also think that having two parents who are engineers means that none of these areas were too foreign to me. They never seemed so esoteric or far away that I could never touch them. And as a result, I think that I started to get into the field more deeply. Of course, there are other students with engineer parents who might have not done the same thing. So I guess it was also just a personality thing that, you choose the path that you want to take. But I definitely think that having that representation at home was an integral part, especially being a young person of color. We always talk about how representation matters, but seeing it in such a close proximity to you makes it something almost natural. And I think I've seen this expressed in all of my siblings. For having immigrant parents as well, education becomes a huge thing given the sacrifices that they make to come to the United States. But beyond that, it's just this proximity to engineering, to technology, to innovation that definitely made me more passionate. And then when I started getting exposed to the social aspect, I realized that there was so much interplay, like all of you have been saying, between various systems and establishments that we've sort of cemented in our society that have resulted in some pretty negative outcomes when it comes to education, and when it comes to education adopting technology as well.
So given what you're so kind of answering, I think you may have partly answered your own question, right? Because maybe it's not the teachers, maybe it's the parents and your environment and the surrounding. This goes back to the discussion we had when we were preparing for this, that how do you make sure, like you're privileged, as you said, because you had parents who were engineers and so on, but a lot of the kids out there may not have that background and so on, and the mentors, if you will, who'll take them to the right places to learn. So I'm just wondering, is it, of course, the technology and platforms and online learning and all of these things are available, right? Is it just the teachers that we need to get to, or is it, so the question is it, do we need to focus on the mentors and the parents? And
Yeah, no, I think the mentors more loosely, because I think a lot of times we can't rely just on parents to sort of be the vehicles for these new educational prospects or institutions, largely because, people come from a variety of backgrounds. So there might be a case in which a parent isn't there or isn't supportive of their child, or a case where this child has to work and they can't commit to extracurriculars. There's just so many different things in your life that can prohibit you from certain opportunities. So I think instead relying on extrinsic factors that can come in and support students, like having mentorship. But also I think that government plays a very deep role here as well. Educational policy has very little regulatory teeth when it comes to almost any institution. especially in the United States, we rarely see educational policy sort of going from bill to act very efficiently. When it's come to AI, all we have is a framework which is not enforceable. And so I think that on the side of both developing responsible technology and scaling it, we need a collaboration between governments and a collaboration between leaders as well, who can make themselves accessible to populations that won't have these opportunities, or they're just not directly available to them, or they're not aware of them as well.
How did you learn SolidWorks?
That's a great question. So essentially, I was just working on building the prosthetic arm, which has come up a couple of times, but it was sort of just like a research project that I was doing. It was connected to HMS, which is a lab that I was working at called the Purdon Lab, and it was sort of a spin out of that research. And so when I realized that I needed to 3D print the prosthetic, I started looking up different software that I could use. I started with Blender, but unfortunately Blender was not robust enough for me to design an entire arm on. So I turned to other types of software, and fortunately my lab has a license for SolidWorks alongside like a couple of other labs that I've worked at. So I was able to finagle my way into the software, and then just started using YouTube tutorials and online tutorials for that as well. And also, people oftentimes open access their work. So what you can do is you can download it and start deciphering it and sort of picking it apart yourself. And I think that's one of the best ways to learn. We talk about project-based learning all the time, and that was a key example of it. Even learning to code, I did the same thing. Went on GitHub, downloaded random files, and started tinkering with and understanding the code. And it gives you fluency in a way that I think is very unique and almost emulates how a baby learns to walk or learns how to speak a different language.
So my interest there was in that it doesn't require that the teacher know anything about what you're interested in, as long as they open doors to let you pursue what you're interested in. And I think that's the idea about having students take agency over their education. If we find out early what their interests are, and we can show them ways to get involved in it and find out all of the things that intersect with their main interest, we can keep them engaged and keep them moving. And not everyone has a family like you have, but if the teachers don't have to teach everything, they can engage more as mentors and coaches and be there for the students to encourage them and let them know, okay, that didn't quite work, but what do you think we could try to make it work, whatever the project is? So
We were talking about this a little bit yesterday in our workshop with the Cleveland, not Cleveland, the Chattanooga crowd, and with Joe from Singapore and Yanni from Finland. But we were talking about the fact, or we started to talk about the fact that COVID was a terrible thing for learning loss, but at the same time, we learned a few very critical lessons, and one of them was that learning happens online. There's a lot there. AI even offers new, as you had brought up before, new opportunities for learning, and in a very good way. Maybe it offers better learning than you might have in a very rural place. As long as you have internet, you can find good learning. But it also changed the relationship of the teacher and the student, and it also changed it changed where we learn. So, kind of to your point a little earlier, the private sector can get more involved. You don't have to be in a school sitting in a chair in front of a blackboard or a whiteboard or a smart board. We can change the place that we learn. We can change how we learn and what our resources are. And the teacher begins to have a very different role, just like what you're saying. It's more about mentoring and bringing, guiding them on how to learn, guiding young people on how to learn for their whole lives, basically. So, anyway.
One of the points where some schools in the US have started to do where they say the learning happens online. When you come to the classroom, it's more of a discussion, right? So because they're not teaching in the classroom because you can do that, but they become the mentor for the discussions and so on. And maybe this idea of more of a, so schools are more centralized learning. And then we are talking a lot about the decentralized learning. I think you brought it up. So maybe a solution is somewhere like that, because centralized learning you have to move the governments and you have to move the masses. Some governments are doing it, some are not. But I think easier path seems to be decentralized learning, right?
So maybe, okay. Well, so I'd like to kind of turn a little bit, and I challenged each of you to come up with one, to identify sort of one factor, one sector that, looking ahead at, teaching technical and digital skills, that kind of literacy. What one systemic approach would you take to making change in education? And so I'm going to point to you first, Sanjay.
I was trying to avoid your gaze. I don't know if you noticed. But for me, I think that I come here with a very specific agenda, and I think that my biases are all out on the table. I believe in inclusive education, and I think that there is a role that that technology specifically can play in making sure that all learners are impacted and all learners are learning. So for me, I think that when we met as a panel earlier and we had a conversation, we were all brainstorming and talking about what does the perfect education system look like? How do we make this, how do we make the perfect education system? And the only thing for me is, I think that one systemic change that I would want to make, which I think is not a novel idea, everyone's been doing this, working towards this for years, but it's clearly very difficult, is I would want to see education become accessible for all. And I think that we have the perfect panel here to help us figure out how we can do that. So let me pass it on to anyone who wants to start us off.
So education for all, there are a couple of words that we need to kind of understand. What do you mean by all? What do you mean by education? So there are, slices that come through it. I'm like full on ADHD. When I was growing up, this word didn't exist. So I had no idea that I had this thing. And when I used to have a problem in writing essays every weekend, I had to write one in my head using words that I could write, but then I had to write another essay using words that I could spell. I just thought everybody was doing that. It wasn't a differentiator. So when you say all, we need to take that whole spectrum together. And that's one side of the all. The other side of the all are people who don't have access to schools or institutions. But then we use the word education. So that's where the distinction I would like to make between schooling and education. There are a lot of people who are really highly educated and are completely illiterate, right? So the difference between education and schooling, for me, if you were going to say what is an educated person, for me, again, biases all on the table, is people who can make good choices in their lives. How do you learn to make good choices in your life? And that is the main definition of education. Because choices, we make choices all the time. So if you learn how to make choices through hard lives or easy lives or privileged lives or whatever you go through, how do you learn how to make choices? And that aspect of what, again, going back, is constructive contributory citizens of a just and harmonious society. I think that includes all, whether and you talk about learning inside classroom, outside classroom, learning is it, whether you do it on a rice field at the age of 40, or you're doing it inside a classroom at the age of 8. All we need to understand what you saw. And for me, the difference between education, being able to make good choices, I'm just repeating that. And I think that has to be the vision for everybody. I mean, I don't think that anybody can. How you do it, how do you create that environment? There's no one right answer, right? It depends on where you are, who you are, what time you are, and who you're dealing with. And you should not try and find a centralized one right answer for this question, because then you're going to fall flat on your face. You need to individualize it, not just to the individual person, but also to the individual situation, location, all that. So therefore, when you talk about individualized learning, it cannot only be for an individual, but it also has to be for a group of people. It has to be personalized to that group. So when we use the word individualized or personalized, we somehow take it to be that one person. But that one person never lives in isolation. all of us live in a community of some sort. So when you talk about personalized or individualized, keep in mind the situation and the geography where that individualized, personalized education is taking place. And I think that's the only way forward for any organization or anything. So, yeah.
Thank you. I think I just want to add a little bit of context and flesh to this as well, because I recognize, thank you for pointing out, it is a very broad statement. But for instance, so when I'm thinking about like making education accessible for all, I'm thinking about really the role of technology in perpetuating the digital divide, really, and how that can actually perpetuate the educational discrepancies and inequality we see in the world today. So we actually worked on a mapping of digital learning platforms all around the world. We mapped 184 countries. We looked at over 470 platforms. And out of all of that, we recognized that only about 20% actually have features for students with special needs and special education needs and disabilities. So whether it's the ability to change the font color for colorblindness, or whether it's the ability to listen to text, we don't offer those facilities, right? Those options on digital learning platforms. So you're automatically excluding a certain group. And similarly, something that we want to talk about also is about, I mean, of course, this is a very obvious topic, but connectivity, right? If you are putting everything online and connectivity is an issue, you're again perpetuating the digital divide, right? And educational inequalities. So really, how do we frame the use of education, technology in education, and how do we frame technology education in a way, learning for technology in a way that is accessible to everyone, all learners, both in and outside school as well. And I'd love to hear some more ideas around that.
Yeah, just a quick comment. I think you talked about connectivity, and it's so important, right? And we've done work in Rwanda and so on, and we see the challenges sometimes you face. So maybe, you know, as we talk about water and power as basic necessities, maybe one of the changes should be internet becomes a basic necessity. And a lot of governments are doing it, right? Everybody should have, and if you, to tell you frankly, if internet is available everywhere, then a lot of this reach suddenly becomes available. And maybe that's the basic necessity, because then tech becomes empowered everywhere. We're finding some challenges here, right?
Well, I was going to say another sort of something that COVID, the pandemic, surfaced was the lack of infrastructure for internet, the lack of availability of computers, around the United States as well, right? As well as all of these other places in the world that we see it and that we might expect it more. But it's a huge problem, and I do feel like Fab in a Box and kind of what we're talking about in terms of scaling, that's part of the solution. Is if we can make it cheap enough and accessible enough to as many as we could possibly, to the majority, then perhaps we might make some headway, right? Anybody else want to say anything on that? Because I'm going to move. Okay,
yeah, no. Hearing all of these responses has sort of shaped my one action item, which is major stakeholdership with young people, but just people who are affected by whatever you're building in general. Like I outlined in the responsibility framework, it's really important that you're involving incumbents of a problem when you're developing a solution. But I think beyond that, what we're finding is that all of these, when we look back, we find that all of these systems were inherently designed in a very inaccessible way. The internet, while it does represent a collective intelligence, was never meant to be a decentralized system. So now we have to go backwards and fix that problem. Same thing goes for education and so many other systems that we see today. And so I personally think that we need to introduce methods of having young people who are affected by these problems as stakeholders in whatever we're designing. So if you work at a large corporation, having a board or having an advisory team that has people who are a part of the communities that you're solving for as a part of the solution as well. With Fidutom, it was all informed by unbanked individuals themselves, which is the only reason I think we had any traction to begin with. And I think also teaching, it's okay, it's back. I think also teaching product design is really, really important, whether that's informally or formally. I did a workshop with the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, and they had this program called La Caixa, and it was amazing. All of the students were building out their own solutions and presenting them and making special considerations for different groups. And I think when we do that, we're fostering the next generation of people that are going to be putting out these technologies. And if at an early stage, we teach them to consider all of the groups that are being affected, we won't have to retrospect 10, 20 years down the line and start solving for all of these problems of technology perpetuating bias or existing lack of accessibility. I think it'll be a lot easier for us to move forward at an exponential rate if we start planting those seeds now.
I love your optimism.
Sherry, I took this question to thinking about the system itself in the U.S. So before 2019, for the 3 years, we had increased our number of teachers by 300,000, and we have a teacher shortage. From the time the pandemic happened until 2022, we lost 700,000 teachers. So in order to keep those, and the teachers we're losing are the young digital natives who walk into a system and are asked to work 20 years ago in technology. So if we don't increase and I'm not even talking about technology for the students, I'm talking about the technology that exists in how you take attendance and how you grade students, and how that if we don't increase that to a point where graduating students now can say, oh, I can live in the system. But I have talked to more 20-something and early 30-something teachers who have just left the field because it's so frustrating. And so I think that we really need to start there, and I totally agree with everything you've said.
Okay. Arun, I'm looking at you. I want to hear what you feel like is, what would you identify sort of one systemic change that you'd like to make, and we can all talk about how we might do that.
Well, it's staring me in the eyes. It says designing resilient futures. It's, it's something, it's a no-brainer. I mean, that's something that has to come into our learning spaces, right? Very correctly, you said that if teaching is a boring, mundane, day job, right? Nobody's going to stay there, no matter what you do. So if you introduce designing resilient futures for the teachers first, right? It changes the whole dynamics inside a school, because the teachers are coming in excited, wanting to learn. And if you create that space that they are learning from the students, who then become stakeholders in the whole system, and it just becomes one learning space. So the demarcation between a teacher and a student needs to disappear. If there was one thing that I would like to see this, and there has to be some aspect of an adult, there are, the rites of passage that kids have to go through. You talked about the fact that there are certain foundational things that you have to learn. I mean, if you don't have to learn how to read and write, and you don't learn your numbers, you're not going to go up there and do a whole bunch of things. So there are foundational things. So that's where there's the aspect that I'm talking about, the early learning, the young till the age of maybe 9 or 10, bring in and the thing that excites us about at that age group, nothing is siloized, right? And then you go up and then everything becomes silo. You learn math separately to physics, to chemistry, to history. It's a nightmare. That together with this whole designing resilient futures is that when you the non-silo learning, where you bring in software, you bring in the teacher's experience, you bring in the students, and through the students, you get the parents. That whole aspect of learning, when everybody is learning together, going forward, remove the silos within these subjects and just let that aspect grow. It's a big number, but I think not difficult to do if you put your mind and your own mindset, if you get the teachers into the learning space, and what you said very clearly, very nicely, that let them get excited about being a learner, then they are the best teachers possible. I hope that makes a little bit of sense.
I think again we started to talk about this a little bit yesterday, but I feel like if we could target pre-service teachers in university or wherever they are trained that we might have a chance of making that kind of systemic change. Because once, yeah, I mean, yes, we want to work with in-service teachers, but I think like the bigger impact and the longer term impact is going to be with pre-service, I believe, if we can get them to that place that you're talking about.
I mean, this is too good an opportunity to miss, to not make a plug. We are going to be running a 7-week program for people who want to become teachers, based here in Bhutan, in Paro, starting later this year. So those people who who want to become, who are in the process of wanting to become teachers, we are happy to talk more about it. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, but I would plug. Come and spread the word that how you are going to target, like you said, people who are thinking of becoming teachers and talk to them seriously about it. It's in Paro. It's going to be an annual program. This year, just one, and then starting next year, it's going to be twice a year, 7-week programs for people from outside of Bhutan.
Another thing we just started to talk about yesterday, let me see if I can recapture it, but it was, I think it was the Chattanooga team, Tony and Michael, and also Yanni from Finland. You know, we have to, if schools are going to stay the way they are, I mean, in the sense of they are the sort of organizing principle of education, we're going to have to, we have to bring in the administration and the district heads and the principals, et cetera. Their mindset has to change as well. And it's critically important for us to start marketing to them, so to speak, or promoting to them this kind of new mindset. At least that's what I think.
Right, one thing around the teachers. So we talked a lot about what are their motivations, right? We don't see a lot of teachers, like unless they really want to teach, the money and everything else, I think compared to private sectors, I don't think there's enough incentives for teachers to do what they're doing. So maybe part of the solution is, I mean, if there's one policy change, maybe even from a pay scale, if you perspective, you look at it, you know, we need more teachers, more good teachers, technically savvy teachers. And if they're leaving, because partly it's, you know, they're not up to the technology because they can find a better job, better paying job somewhere else, right?
You think we should put an education tax on private sector?
Yeah, maybe, right? Maybe.
Right. So when we talk about motivating teachers and trying to keep them engaged in the learning system, I think one of the things I've noticed is that if you give teachers the platform to motivate themselves and to keep each other running, that's actually a really successful form of teacher professional development. So continuous teacher professional development, and technology can play an excellent role here in creating and developing the necessary communities of practice to keep each other going and motivated. So one example that I've actually been working with is the One Teacher Network in Thailand. So this is a group of teachers. They came together during the COVID because they realized, you know what, we don't have the digital skills to educate our children online. We don't know how to put together PowerPoint presentations. We don't know how to host things on the LMS. So they came together and they started teaching each other. And now they've started running these online Zoom programs where they're capacity building for teachers, but also for district education officers and administrators, because they want to make sure that everyone's on the same page and has the digital literacy to be able to use technology more effectively in the classroom. And it started out in the southern provinces, and now they've expanded up to the north. They're really making a move. And currently we're working with them to make this program more scalable without taking away the authenticity of it being a grassroots-led program. So I think that often you just need to give people the platform to be able to push forward their own education. This goes back to what we were saying earlier about making sure that teachers are learning with the students. So teachers are also learners in the classroom. And this is just like a side note, but when we talk to these teachers and you hear the enthusiasm about designing curriculum for their peers and what they learned, and they do an assessment feedback loop for each other and everything. So that passion for learning needs to be sort of carried on throughout their teaching journey as well. And I think it gives them the motivation to want to try new things in the classroom as well. So really using technology as a convening platform for communities of practice is a really, really powerful tool.
Okay, Suchit, do you have? Well, I was going to ask you. No, but I was going to ask you what would your one systemic change look like?
I think just increase the salaries, of teachers. I think.
Leah, how about you?
Totally agree with both of those, and elevate the respect for teachers. One of the organizations, the Annenberg Foundation in America, is trying to get the airlines, when they say active military, to say active military and active educators, please board first, because we need to expect. Thank you.
Okay, Zoe, what do you think of all this?
Yeah, no, I really like it. I really agree that there do need to be some significant policy changes when it comes to teachers. There has to be a much greater buy-in. I think that companies, especially since AI companies, manufacturing companies, are going to be accruing most of the profits in the next few years, we should have some pretty stringent ESG requirements for them and make them invest in not only teachers, but in youth-based solutions. I mean, there's this idea that, like, if you're a young person doing something, there's like a phenomena that surrounds you and people just want to pour money into you. It might help you get a job, but to an extent, like, people don't trust you to do something independently when you're young. And even for a proven solution, it's very, very difficult to get people on board with your individual solution. They might say, you can be in my company, or we can pay you this much to advise us on this something. But the moment you want to do something independently, that's when the pushback starts. So I think also ensuring that, we're actively investing in solutions, we're taking things seriously, because I think too often we think of like young people doing things as like science fair projects, but no, some people want to go deeper, some people want to deploy to real people. So I think facilitating that will be instrumental, and I think with policy changes and with some harsh ESG requirements, we can definitely make that happen.
I also think we need to, yes. I also think you're talking about legislation. I feel like we haven't done a very good job yet of convincing all the different stakeholders of why they need to do this. And so we haven't put forth the right proposition yet in front of the government. We haven't put the right proposition forward in private industry. We can't even convince parents in the United States. They're so politicized and polarized. And so I think there's something to figuring out exactly how to articulate this in a way that they understand and that motivates them, because we just haven't done that yet, it feels like. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I agree. Fidutom does political sort of activism / lobbying on both sides of the aisle in the United States. And one big thing we've seen, and I think it was even highlighted in hearings when they were putting like the CEO of Google on the stand, is that there is such low technical literacy in Congress and government at some of the highest levels. I remember, I think one of the senators was like saying like, oh, there isn't a guy behind the internet just like typing the answer every time you search something up. And that's something like we say as a joke, right? But someone genuinely thinks this, and these are people that are making the biggest policy decisions for the United States. So I think just integrating more of that advocacy into government and injecting more of that literacy as well is really important. And from our experience, they've been pretty receptive to having outside groups sort of bring in their opinions and knowledge, et cetera. So I definitely agree that there does need to be a stronger push on government as well.
No, I completely agree. And I think that something that I talked about earlier as well is about how when we talk about improving and enhancing education through technology, it's almost become like a buzzword, using technology in education. Everybody wants to do it. And the minute you talk to stakeholders, you want to use machine learning and AI, and you want to use computers and laptops. But then I think it's so important to say, to what end? Why are we doing this? To what end are we doing this? And education is interesting, right? Because everybody has an opinion. Everybody's been through it. Everybody has someone who's in the system right now. So everyone has a stake in it. And I think because of that, the politicization of education is also an interesting topic, maybe not for today, but I think it's important to keep in mind that everyone has their agenda when it comes to education. But I would say that there is a way to be agnostic and be evidence-based and be very intentional and strategic about the use of technology, about any sort of reform or any sort of change that you're trying to make in education, just making sure that we focus on learning outcomes, not necessarily certification and graduations, but learning outcomes primarily.
There was something wonderful. I can't remember who said this yesterday, but they said, what is like, if I graduate from high school with a 3.5, what does that mean? I mean, it's just a number. I don't know anything about that person. I don't know anything about what their passions are. I don't know anything about what they're good at, except for that test of getting that grade, which is, I thought was very interesting. Anyway.
Just one.
The universities across the world are now changing from that. The SAT scores are no longer the main way to get admission, and you must be seeing what's happening in the US with the admission policies, what the elite are getting in. But moving away from that score, the 3.5, is absolutely crucial. I'm so happy you said that, because the designing resilient futures, I think, stems from that. The profile of a child, if she's not involved in, it's not just a statement of purpose, it's a whole portrait that she makes of herself, of her learning journey, that more and more people are using to, there has to be a filter, because you can't take everybody for everything. That filter, I think, is just becoming, and again, using AI to what purpose you're saying, I think that's a very important aspect, to be able to bring out from within you the real you. So that's why I said, rather than artificial, augmented intelligence, what brings out from within you to be able to differentiate from the 3.5. I just wanted to. Sorry.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on a point you made earlier about that the younger students are not recognized as. I actually would beg to differ, because in the private money today for startups started by young founders is everywhere. I travel across the world and I'm seeing in every country. In fact, I would argue that taking government money is detrimental to a startup, because then it's free money. You earn your money, and private money is out there. And I see every time younger people starting companies, they seem to get easier to get money. So I think there's a lot of support for that.
Yeah, I think it also may depend on what you're working on as well, because I think for social entrepreneurship, the funding landscape is a little bit.
Of course, I mean, the private business is a little bit away from that, but I understand. But again, you were here listening to Finance Minister. What did he say, right? He talked about the happiness is a place, and then believe that. And I think the economic presentation we had today, there was a whole point about economic productivity versus the social value, and both have values, but ultimately, so.
I would love to open this up to all of you. Do you have questions? Oh my goodness, we got lots of questions. Do I have a runner? Can I have a runner?
I can be the runner, but we also have a couple of questions from the YouTube.
Online?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, wonderful. Okay.
We'll go first and
Okay. Let's take two or three here, and then go online for 2 or 3.
Hello, I'm Joe. In fact, that quote came from me about what's 3.5. Yeah, and in fact, we are moving away to a mastery transcript that can describe the student more holistically. Yeah. Actually, I would like to ask Dr. Arun, when you say augmenting intelligence, I like that. Yeah, in the sense, because I think when people look at ChatGPT, they get frightened by it, but it is very good at coaching. It is very good at providing timely feedback. In fact, right now, what we are doing is there's a subject called Global Perspective, and it is a skill to teach critical thinking. And we are using that to teach students to develop their skills using a coaching method. But yet, they also have to write report, and we are using the ChatGPT to provide very good feedback, timely feedback, actually. One of the biggest problems is when you write essay, the teacher has to take like maybe 2 weeks to mark it. That's not timely feedback, and that's not how. So I'd like to ask you, when you say augmenting intelligence, maybe you can elaborate on that.
That'll take about 3-4 days if not more. But I'll just quickly say that using of artificial intelligence is way of, let's say, if you have so through the Bhutan Baccalaureate, when we look at students' work, it goes back to the students without a mark. There's no grades on it. There are feedback, right? Sometimes a little tedious for the teacher, but they also look. So it also helps them to design the questions in such a way so that they are looking forward to the answers. Because it's the same question and it's very boring to mark. But if you do that, and then if you use the platform of ChatGPT or many others now, right, to help you figure out and to get to the analysis of the data that you have created, which is non-numerical, right? That is fantastic. But not using it to correct students' essays, because then I, as a teacher, am not feeling the life of the student. I am reading it, giving it and I have 30 students, 60 students in various sections, and I use that to analyze the data that I have generated. That makes life a little easier. So that's augmenting my intelligence as a teacher. It also gives me structure. If I ask, this is what I want to do, some of the stuff that you've been talking about, getting onto a software, and if you use that to ask questions of what you should do next, rather than asking them to do it for you, that's what I mean by augmenting intelligence. It helps you move along on your learning journey rather than parking your learning into the laps of artificial intelligence. I don't know. I hope that makes.
Hi, I'm Leila. I'm from the Maker Institute in Czech Republic, but I'm originally from Colombia and proud Colombian. I have the context of a little bit both Colombia, the Czech Republic, and Germany, where I've come from. And even though I try to tell to people I'm building a Fab Lab, they still don't know what that is. Is there a propagation, communication, larger scheme of popularization that we can put out there? Is there a movie on Netflix? Is there something that we can do? Because I think that honestly, it is very difficult for us to keep on explaining to all our different networks what a Fab Lab is, or makerspace or hackerspace and whatnot. And I think I would like to know if this is, I agree with everything you've said. I would like not to have to rely on marketing, but I think that marketing and communication is education nonetheless.
I'm going to do something kind of awkward here, and I'm going to point to the Chattanooga crowd over there. They've been very successful at being able to communicate this to a formal school system. And so I might ask you guys to answer that question.
We're not prepared for that, but I think in the broader, I don't know the context of the Fab Lab you're with. We have put about 100 Fab Labs in public schools in the United States. In every instance, we focus a lot on the topic of this conversation around systems change. And in that regard, we try to focus our efforts first, not on those subjected to the systems, but those with the authority to affect change within the system. So in the school context, that's a lot of work with principals, with superintendents, constantly considering those subjected to the system, students, teachers, etc. But in terms of like getting interest, it's for us less about marketing and more about relationship. What we saw out of the first Fab Labs at MIT and the Fab Network, we saw incredible impact in the communities where those labs were serving, but they weren't originally built for the K-12 context. So considering what the K-12 context is, and I think, I don't remember who was saying it earlier, but I do think we have to be very mindful of the context that we're implemented within, both the community and the larger scheme of the system context that we're implementing in. When we consider that, we're able to build relationships within that context, discover what are key levers there, what's meaningful to the people in that context, and then Fab Lab, digital fabrication in general, and its potential for impact on learning become a mechanism to drive toward their unique goals. It seems like that's a pillar of Fab Labs in general. And in the education schema, I think we've tried to build on top of that to say if this is what Fab Labs are intended to do in a community broadly, within the K-12 schema, how can we leverage that same mindset? Say, how can we transition learning for all students when digital fabrication is a possibility, right? When it's available and and broadly accessible. So it's less for us about communicating, here's a benefit, and more about co-constructing what's the unique benefit in that given context with each of the stakeholders.
Thank you, Michael. I think we should take one from online. Norella, are you? She's around. Okay, well, while we're waiting.
One question on this side
Okay.
of the room.
Yeah, let's do that.
Thank you. My name is Herbert Perico. I also come from Colombia, coincidentally. Thank you for taking my suggestion. It's regarding the loss of teachers in education, whether it's higher education or any other context. But I believe not only teachers are underpaid, like you very well stated, they're under-recognized and under many other things. But as well, I think there's a job in higher education institutions to promote a purpose, a different purpose for what we're doing. If we come to work thinking that we're bettering either our lives or everybody else's lives, I think things begin to change. That's our experience. Thank you.
Can I
Thank
say
you.
something to that, Sherry? Because there's a school in Michigan that has, when a student in 9th grade identifies as someone that they would like to be a teacher, they're automatically put into a track where they spend 1 day a week in a classroom supporting a teacher for 9th grade. By 10th grade, they're a teacher's assistant in that room, and they actually take more. So by the time they graduate from college, they have had 4 years of classroom experience, understand classroom management. Nobody goes into education the same. I'm in nonprofit. Nobody goes into nonprofit because they're, going to make a lot of money. You go into it because it's a mission for you. And if you can identify that in young students and then help support that, and it sounded like something that you're doing with the teacher training, anyone who says they'd like to be a teacher should be embraced and then encouraged and help them build to that future.
Thank you, Leah. I'd love to take an online question.
Yeah, so we have two. The first one is, what part of education is the one meant here for all? I mean, access to knowledge, access to teachers, access to a learning community.
Will you repeat that one more time?
So, what part of education is one meant here for all? Okay. I mean, access to knowledge, access to teachers, access to a learning community.
Anybody want to take that?
Sure. I mean, I think the common theme that we've been talking about here today is just learning, right? I think when we talk about education for all, is providing opportunities for everyone to learn something that can help them do something, right? Learn something that can help them gain employment, learn something that can make them a better person, learn something that can make them sort of advance whatever passion that they have. And I think actually this is a plug for the Super Fab Lab here, I guess. But I think that having spaces like this is so important because you're providing opportunities that defy what we traditionally think about as learning. So when we think about learning, we think about words on a piece of paper or words on a laptop and how we're going to translate that into thoughts and critical ideas and mathematics and literacy and so on. But here we're talking about learning by doing, learning by making. And I think that all of these forms of learning need to be considered and made accessible to wider populations beyond just school systems. So that's essentially what I meant earlier when I talked about education for all. And I would also like to stress the fact that when we talk about learning communities is not just the provision of this Fab Lab, right? I think having conferences like this where you bring the minds together to actually have conversations. Now I'm just advertising the Fab Lab in this whole conference. But yeah, I think that it's so important to have people come together and discuss and co-create and actually take ownership of their own learning through programming like this, in addition to providing these spaces. So really it is the learning community that we're talking about.
I think we have time for one more question.
Do we do one more online?
One more online. Okay.
So this is a question from Tinley Choden, who would like to hear the panel's thoughts on climate change impact on children's learning outcomes and the interplay of technology.
Yeah, so this is actually something that I've been working on quite recently, and I think it's really interesting. And this is where we start thinking about accessible technologies. So recently, there were some very severe floods in Pakistan that led to huge learning loss for very disadvantaged communities. And I think that what we saw there was that there was a need for technology to be used, not just for educating or the provision of learning content, but for messaging, for intents of purpose, intents of coordination, messaging, the importance of continuing learning, and reaching the communities and letting them know that we will continue learning in a certain way. So it's not just about the provision of learning content, but I think that technology presents a really keen opportunity to coordinate learning in climate emergencies, because I think that when a climate emergency occurs, you just can't rely on existing digital learning platforms, existing systems. You need to be rapid, you need to be agile. And I think that it's really important to make sure that you have the systems and infrastructure in place to be able to contact all parents and caregivers, all students and learners, and provide them with the necessary information, not just about traditional learning, but what to do in the case of a flood. How can you make sure your family is safe? So really the key role that messaging can play in climate emergencies for educating students and then later leading to learning continuity, I think is really pivotal. And when we talk about technology here, I mean simple SMS messages, because no one is going around with a tablet for learning continuity during floods.
You tapped into something really important, and we were discussing this idea of like frugal science earlier, and I think that's something that's so important. I think earlier I misspoke when I said the internet's not decentralized. I meant it can't be disseminated easily because there's a lot of infrastructural requirements. So I definitely agree that I think the next wave of technology is going to be technology that strips down to bare bones and can be implemented and deployed easily anywhere. And a lot of times this technology, isn't going to be bringing in some of the big revenues, which is why I sort of made that statement of we need more investment in things of that nature, because I think social entrepreneurship can be highly profitable, but first we need the backing and the proof of concept and the funding in order to make that happen. And that starts with technology that can be implemented anywhere, even in the lowest infrastructure communities.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you both. I think we have maybe one more question from the audience here, if there's anyone else that wants to ask. Okay.
First of all, I wanted to say what a wonderful symposium. I was on the edge of my seat the whole time listening to all the conversations. It was fantastic. So I'm Kanin, and I've been teaching for a very long time, about 20 years. I started as a science teacher, and now I'm doing supporting science for special education kids. So here's my question. Okay, and maybe the young student can answer this question because you've been fresh out of school, right? Okay. So where I live right now is in US, and we're getting rid of leveling classes or tracking classes. So we have CP courses, which is college prep. Then we have accelerated classes, and then we have honors, and then we have AP classes. So what I'm saying is for like science, we have CP, accelerated. So students are leveled into those classes. Now, is this good or bad? I'm not sure, because the bad portion could be because, that's kind of segregating some of the kids. The kids that are in the CP classes, which is the lowest class, okay, they're all grouped together and they stay together and they're not mingling with kids who are in honors classes, okay? And now parents have a problem. They do want leveling in my class. I mean, in the city that I live in, okay? Because those are the more privileged kids, okay? So they're learning from other kids who are also privileged class kids. So do you think leveling is good, or do you think leveling is bad?
I guess whenever I'm presented with a really polarizing question, like like good or bad, my answer is always it can be good if we just change it. And my perspective on leveling classes, we use like AP, some schools use IB. I think what needs to happen is that they need to stop being a token for advancement into higher education or other institutions. Like the more AP classes you take, that directly correlates with better outcomes when it comes to college admissions. There was a recent study that was even done showing that being of a privileged background financially is like a huge boost in terms of getting into elite colleges, like to the point where it's almost a determining factor. And so I think if we stop having these as tokens of success, we can then allow people to advance to whatever context that they'd like without it creating an adversarial relationship between those who don't want to advance and those who do. And we can also have gen ed classes where there's a symbiotic relationship happening. We allow these people to intermingle, and then in certain subjects, if someone's more advanced, they can level up. I think it would be detrimental if we said there's just no leveling at all. We would be holding a significant amount of students back from learning additional content that they'd please. But I also think it's just as bad if we say, you know, if you have special needs, or if you don't have access to a private tutor, or if your school doesn't offer those AP courses, that you're less than. And so I think the onus is on the institutions who create the value of advancing to stop doing it in a way that causes this pushback. Yes, this friction. So yeah.
Very good. And the last, one more thing I just wanted to add. I don't know, when you were saying education for everyone, right? And that's awesome. And not just technology, but there's a lot of accommodations for kids. Like, for example, kids who need more time to take tests, okay? They should be allocated for more time. Or kids who may need questions to be read, okay, prior to taking the test, or maybe even writing. So those are all accommodations that we can do for children, along with the technology.
Thank you so much. That's it. We're out of time. I just want to thank you all. I enjoyed this conversation very much. So, and I really appreciate you all. I did want to shamelessly plug a few things. So, Okay's Away on Thursday will be here on stage giving a keynote about his startup and about a lot of his work. And then today, this afternoon, Arun and his wonderful team and FAB Foundation are going to try and design some curriculum for the whole child. And so we're doing that in the Raven Room at 3 o'clock. So if you'd like to experiment with us, please join us. And just thank you. Thank you all so much. All right. Hello. I believe it's lunchtime.